Do you know what it's like to be reading a book and to be really thinking about what it would be like to be the main character? So you're turning each page and you're thinking, gosh, I'd be sad if that happened to me too, or wow, I'm really happy for them that they're happy. I know last year a lot of you said that you had read the book Wonder in third grade, and you think about all the things that Augie went through and how you were really rooting for him by the end. You wanted him to have friends, and you wanted him to be successful, and you wanted him to be happy. And there's a reason for that. It's because the way the author wrote about him, it made you understand how he felt. Because unless you can, as an author, help your reader understand how your character really feels, then the reader doesn't really care. It's just another random person doing a random thing. But what you want to accomplish as a writer is you want to write about characters who feel real to people. They feel like they could be your actual friend in real life. All right? And the way you do that is, as a writer, you have to understand your character. Before you start working on your story, you have to really think about what is your character about? How does your character feel about something? So I want to read a book aloud today, just so that we all have the same story that I can go back to and talk about. And then we'll talk about that when we get ready to look at our writing today. The story is called Encounter, and you may have heard it before. The moon was well overhead, and our great fire had burned low. A loud clap of thunder woke me from my dream. All dreams are not true dreams, my mother says. But in my dream that night, 3 great winged birds with voices like thunder rode wild waves in our bay. They were not like any birds I had ever seen, for sharp, white teeth filled their mouths. I left my hammock and walked to the beach. There were my dream birds again, only now they were real, 3 giant sailed canoes floating in the bay. I stared at them all through the night. When the sun rose, each great canoe gave birth to many little ones and swam awkwardly to our shore. I ran and found our chief still sleeping in his hammock. "Do not welcome them," I begged. "My dream is a warning." But it is our custom to welcome strangers, to give them tobacco leaf, to feast with them in the pepper pot, and to trade gifts. "You are but a child," the chief said to me. "All children have bad dreams." So when you think about this, how is the person in our story feeling? How is the little boy feeling? If you have a really bad dream, how do you feel? And if you have a bad dream and you kind of think that it means something bad is going to happen, how does it make you feel when you think that those things are actually happening? I would guess he feels pretty afraid at this point, because that bird was scary in his dream, and even though he knows it's not a real bird, he doesn't have a good feeling about the ships. The baby canoes spat out many strange creatures, men, but not men. We did not know them as human beings, for they hid their bodies in colors like parrots. Their feet were hidden also, and many of them had hair growing like bushes on their chins. 3 of them knelt before their chief and pushed sticks into the sand. Then I was even more afraid. So the author tells us he's afraid, but also he's a little bit confused because he's seeing things that he's never seen before. Because how would you feel if suddenly people came to you and they were wearing totally different clothing and they had totally different features and they looked like people, but there was just something really, really different about them? You'd probably have a lot of questions too. Our young men left the shelter of the trees. I, who was not yet a man, followed, crying, "Do not welcome them! Do not call them friends!" No one listened to me, for I was a child. Our chief said, "We must see if they are true men." So I took one by the hand and pinched it. The hand felt like flesh and blood, but the skin was moon to my son. And you look and see his skin is so much lighter than the boy's skin. The stranger made a funny noise with his mouth, not like talking, but like the barking of a yellow dog. So when he pinched him, he yelped because it hurt. Our chief said to us, "See how pale they are? No one can be that color that comes from the earth. Surely they came from the sky." Then he leaped before them and put his hands up, pointing to the sky, to show he understood how far they'd flown. "Perhaps they have tails," said my older brother. "Perhaps they have no feet." Our young men smiled, but behind their hands, so the guests would not feel bad. Then they turned around to show that they had no tails. So you have these people who are native to the land, and they've never seen any of these things. And you can imagine how that might feel to them. Everything is so strange and new, and they have no frame of reference for what these people might be doing. They really do think that they're so pale that they can't be from the earth, because if you're on the earth, then the sun would have already browned you up. Okay? So the author is giving us all these clues as to how the tribal people feel. And you have to just keep asking yourself, how would I feel? Our chief gave the strangers balls of cotton thread to bind them to us in friendship. He gave them spears that they thought that they might fish and not starve. He gave them gum rubber balls for sport. He gave them parrots, too, which made our young men laugh behind their hands all over again, knowing it was our chief's little joke that the strangers looked like parrots. But the strangers behaved almost like human beings, for they laughed too, and gave in return tiny smooth balls the color of sand and sea and sun strung upon a thread. And they gave hollow shells with tongues that clanged chung-a-chung, and they gave woven things that fit upon a man's head and could cover a boy's ears. For a while I forgot my dream. For a while I was not afraid. So how do you feel when you get gifts, when somebody gives you something that's cool that you've never seen before, and you want to play with it and you want to touch it? Look at that look on his face. He's excited, and we know he's excited because he says he forgot that he was afraid. And that's how we know that he's excited. So we built a great feasting fire and readied the pepper pot and yams and cassava bread and fresh fish, for though the strangers were not quite human beings, we would still treat them as such. Our chief rolled tobacco leaves and showed them how to smoke, but they coughed and snorted and clearly did not know about these simple things. So, right now, we know he's feeling in a pretty good place. He's got the familiar things going on. Then I leaned forward to stare into their chief's eyes. They were blue and gray like the shifting sea. Suddenly, I remembered my dream and stared at each one of the strangers in return. Even with those dark, human eyes, they looked away, like dogs before they were driven from the fire. So I drew back from the feast, which is not what one should do, and I watched how the sky strangers touched our gold nose rings and golden armbands, but not the flesh of our faces or arms. I watched their chief smile. It was a serpent smile, no lips and all teeth. I jumped up crying, "Do not welcome them!" But the welcome had already been given. So after he starts to get comfortable, he looks around and he starts noticing that the people, there's something that's just not quite like everybody else that he's used to seeing. And he notices that they seem to really be drawn to the gold that the tribe has. And his tribe's not like that. His tribe doesn't think that that gold is special. So the boy in the story is wondering, what is it about the gold? So when you start to question people, it means you have doubts. He's starting to be doubtful. And when he starts to be doubtful, then he remembers about his dream and that he was afraid. So the author so far is telling us that he's got all these reasons that he's afraid. I ran back under the trees, back to the place where my zinnis stood. I fed it little pieces of cassava and fish and yam from the feast. Then I prayed, Let the pale strangers from the sky go away from us. My zinnis stood back at me with unblinking wood eyes. I gave it the smooth balls a stranger had dropped in my hand. Take these eyes and see into the hearts of the strangers from the sky. If it must be, let something happen to me to show our people what they should know. My zinnis was silent. It spoke only in dreams. Indeed, it had spoken to me already. So he's staring at his statue, which is obviously some kind of ritual piece that they have for their religion. And he's telling it, look, I know something's not right because you told me in my dream. And then we know that he's brave because he says, look, you got to have something bad happen so that my people can be safe, so that they'll believe me that these people are no good. So if something bad has to happen, do it to me. Something bad can happen to me, and then that way everybody else will believe me, and then they'll be safe. So that tells us a little insight into him too. He doesn't say, I am brave. Just in the story, through his dialogue with his statue, that's what we learn. Everything he's done so far has told us that he cares about his tribe and that he doesn't think that these people are safe and that he wants them to be safe. When I returned from the feast, one of the strangers let me touch his sharp silver stick. To show I was not afraid, I grasped it firmly, as one would a spear. It bit my palm so hard the blood cried out, but still no one understood, no one heard. They did not hear because they did not want to listen. They desired all that the strangers had brought, the sharp silver spear, round pools to hold in the hand and that gave a man back his face, a mirror, darts that sprang from sticks with a sound like thunder that could kill a parrot from many paces away, bullets. We were given none of these, only singing shells and tiny balls on strings. We were patted upon the head as a child pats a yellow dog. We were smiled at with many white teeth and a serpent's smile. So in the story, the people that are coming from the sky are giving them all sorts of trinkets, jewelry, beads, things like that. But they actually have weapons, and the tribal people don't realize that they're weapons. And so the little boy thinks he's getting ready to touch a spear because he's never seen a sword. And so he grabs the sword, and if you grab a sword or a knife from the knife end, you're going to get cut. So he sees this as a bad sign because they're bringing these sharp, scary things, and his tribe doesn't know anything about it. And they're not sharing the sharp, scary things. They're not sharing the little balls that come out of a stick, a gun, so little a musket ball that comes out of a musket to kill animals. They're not sharing that. And the little boy is saying, okay, guys, this is not right. This is not right. So we still know that he's skeptical. It doesn't have to say that the little boy is skeptical. The author is giving us all of these things that the people are doing, and we're getting to observe that. The next day, the strangers returned to their great canoes. They took 5 of our young men and many parrots with them. They took me. I knew then it was a sign from my Zimus, a sign from my people. So I was brave and did not cry out. But I was afraid. So we know how badly he wanted his people to realize that these guys were up to no good. So we imagine, how would you feel if you were on this boat right now? Maybe you'd be curious because you'd wonder where you were going. Maybe you'd be afraid because you didn't know where you were going. Maybe you'd be afraid because you understood that these people had sharp, dangerous things and you didn't know what they planned to do with them. Or maybe you would just be excited because you were tired of living where you were living and you wanted to go someplace else. But it's important to stop and ask yourself, how would you feel? And then how do you think this character feels? Because I care about him. At this point, I hope he doesn't get hurt when he goes with these people. That night, while my people slept on shore, the great sailed canoes left our bay, going farther and farther than even our strongest men could go. Soon the beach and trees and everything I knew slipped away, until my world was only a thin, dark line stretched between sky and sea. What else was there to do? In the early morning, another land lay close enough to see. Silently, I let myself over the side of the great canoe. I fell down and down and down into the cold water. Then I swam to that strange shore. So he's jumped over the side of the canoe. You have to ask yourself, what made him do that? It's the middle of the night. People in the canoe are asleep. He must be desperate. I think that's the word that I would use to describe him at this point, is desperate. He wants to get away. Many days I walked following the sun. Many nights I swam, and many times the sky was full with the moon and stars. All along the way, I told the people of how I sailed in the great canoes. I told of the pale strangers from the sky. I said our blood would cry out in the sand. I spoke of my dream of the white teeth. But even those who saw the great canoes did not listen, for I was a child. So you have to ask yourself right now, how is the character feeling? How would you feel? So it was we lost our lands to the strangers from the sky. We gave our souls to their gods. We took their speech into our mouths, forgetting our own. Our sons and daughters became their sons and daughters, no longer true humans, no longer ours. That is why I, an old man now, dream no more dreams. That is why I sit here wrapped in a stranger's cloak, counting the stranger's bells on a string, telling my story. May it be a warning to all the children and all the people in every land. So the author ends the story by saying that all the bad things that he thought were going to happen, they happened, and he wants this story to be a reminder to people. And you ask yourself, well, what's the reminder? Is the reminder about being afraid or being aware of people, or is it about listening to people when they're in trouble? What's the moral of the story? And that's a question for another time, because this conversation is about how do we get to know that character. Never in the book did the author describe what the child looked like, what the child was wearing, what the child's personality was. The author didn't say, this is a dark-skinned boy wearing a breechcloth with dark eyes. He was brave, he was strong, he cared about... No, because authors don't need to do that, because authors have other ways to tell us about the characters. The author told us about that character by his actions and his conversations with other people. So that's what I want you to look at today, and we'll take a look at my story and see how we can do that too. Today I want to teach you that after you develop your characters, you can draft possible story arcs. And I want to teach you something new about plotting your story, something that will help you whenever you write fiction from now on. Did you notice the title of the unit is Arc of a Story? Well, think about what an arc is. It goes up, and it curves at the top, and then it comes back down. And that's kind of what you want to do with your story. The author, Patricia Riley Gift, she says that the fiction writer's job is to make every part of the story so interesting that the reader can't wait to turn the page. People call it plotting, but Patricia Riley Gift, she calls it making the problem worse and worse. So that's what makes us want to keep turning the page. It's about the way your character moves through whatever is happening to him or her in the story. You think about someone like Drew in the story Sidekicked, and how we know where he was at the beginning of the story, and currently, we're not exactly sure what the problem is. One of the problems is that the Titan is not a very good superhero to him, and he's not helping him with his training, and he's not coming to rescue him. So what we have to do is we have to figure out how is he going to get over that problem. And that's what it is to be a good writer. It's to write about the problems the character has. If the characters don't have any problems, there's really no reason for them to be in a story. Okay? So the arc of a story can show you that something's going to happen, that things are going to get tough, but then things are going to change, and then the character is hopefully going to solve the problem. Then after they solve the problem, the character is a little bit different. It's kind of like how at the beginning of third grade, you were in third grade, and you had all of the problems that you had in third grade. You had to learn to get along with people, some of you were at a new school, then we all got sent home in March, and we had all these things we had to get over, and eventually, third grade came to an end. And a lot of those problems, you figured out how to solve them. And you know what? Now you're a different person. Everybody's a different person when they go through problems. And you want to make sure that your characters are changed too. So what we're going to do today is we're going to look at our plot of our story. And I want to look at my story about Anne, and I want to think about what I want to happen to her. And I'm going to draw mine a little bit differently. And you're going to have to draw yours on paper unless you want to try to do it on Google Doc. And this is just one of those things, guys, where I'll trust you that you did it. You don't need to take a picture of it and send it to me. You just need to do your best and then have it in a place where you can go back and look at it. So I started my story, and I know that Anne is losing her races. That's something that I know already. And another thing that I know is that my goal, what I hope the story ends, is that Anne wins a race. I already told you that's what my goal of the story was. So I have to decide at the very beginning how I want my story to end. It's okay to write on the fly. It's okay not to plan every little thing of your story out. You don't have to have every detail ready. But you do need to understand where you're trying to get to, or your story will be rambly and it won't make sense. Things that your character does in the beginning won't have any bearing on what happens to them in the end, and you don't want that to happen. So I need to think of some things that are going to happen. All right, so right now she's losing her races. In the end, I want her to win a race. I would like for her to have one problem where she argues with her parents. I think it would also be interesting for her to get in trouble at school. Right now, I may not know what I want to happen, but I would like her to have some conflict at school. At one point, I want her to quit the team. I don't know why she's going to quit the team yet. I haven't decided that, but I think that would be a big problem, right? So far, her problem started that she's just not winning. Then she gets into arguments with her parents. Then she gets in trouble at school. Eventually, she quits the team. That's a huge problem. And then, at some point, she's going to have to return and then she's going to win her race. So that's just a very basic kind of plot that I can have for my story. And I can return to it as I come up with new ideas. So today, what I would like for you to do is I would like for you to, on a piece of paper, I would like for you to plot out your story. Again, this is for you. This isn't for me, but you do need to do it because it's going to help you in the future as you're continuing to write your story. So you need to do some kind of an arc. You can do more of a curve or a hill, or you can do more of a pointed thing like I like to do. Or if you think you just want to do a timeline, you could always just make a timeline where you have it listed out like this in order of what you want to do. Or if you know that your story is going to take place in one day, maybe you say something in the morning before school, and then in the morning at school, and then maybe lunchtime. So maybe you have a day in mind. However you do it, you're trying to put these events in order. And you notice I didn't say a lot of specific things today. I could if I wanted to, but today my goal really is just to flesh out the ideas in terms of what I want her to run into. What kinds of problems do I want her to have? All right? So go ahead, grab your notebooks, and make your plot maps.